What if the story you learned about the American Revolution left out the most important parts? Not just the battles and famous speeches, but the fear, the division, the secret deals, and the people caught in the middle. The American Revolution was not a clean, united fight for freedom. It was chaotic, deeply personal, and far more complicated than most of us realize. This is the untold story of the American Revolution. When people imagine the Revolution, they often picture determined colonists standing together against British tyranny. That version is powerful, but incomplete. The truth is that the American Revolution, fought from 1775 to 1783, was more than a war between colonies and a king. It was a struggle over power, identity, loyalty, and survival. It was also a civil war between Americans themselves. That is where the untold story begins. In 1775, the 13 colonies were not united. Far from it. Historians generally estimate that about one-third of colonists supported independence, one-third remained loyal to Britain, and one-third tried to stay neutral. That means the revolution was not simply patriots versus redcoats. It was neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother, and community against community. Loyalists, also known as Tories, believed the colonies were safer and stronger under British rule. Some feared economic collapse if ties with Britain were cut. Others believed rebellion was illegal, reckless, and destined to fail. Patriots, meanwhile, saw British authority as growing more aggressive and unjust with each new law and tax. Many people just wanted peace. But peace became impossible. Tensions had been building for years. After the French and Indian War ended in 1763, Britain was left with huge debts. Parliament decided the colonies should help pay for imperial defense. This led to new taxes like the Stamp Act of 1765, which placed a direct tax on printed materials, and the Townshend Acts of 1767, which taxed imported goods like glass, paper, and tea. To British leaders, these taxes seemed reasonable. To many colonists, they were dangerous. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," captured their anger, but the real issue ran deeper. Colonists feared that if Parliament could tax them without consent, then it could also control their trade, property, and local government. By 1770, violence had already entered the picture. In Boston, British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5 colonists in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Then, in 1773, came the Boston Tea Party, when colonists dumped British tea into the harbor to protest the Tea Act. Britain answered with harsh penalties called the Coercive Acts, or the Intolerable Acts. Instead of restoring order, these measures pushed the colonies even closer to war. In April 1775, the first fighting broke out at Lexington and Concord. But before the Revolution was won on battlefields, it was won in people's minds. Ideas were weapons. Newspapers, pamphlets, public speeches, and political cartoons shaped how ordinary colonists understood the crisis. No single work had a greater impact than Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published in January 1776. Written in clear, direct language, it attacked monarchy and argued that independence was not only possible, but necessary. Common sense spread quickly through the colonies and changed the conversation. Independence, once considered extreme, suddenly felt urgent. Paine gave the revolution a moral voice, and that voice helped transform scattered resistance into a united political movement. Still, the promise of liberty was deeply uneven. For enslaved African Americans, the revolution raised painful questions. In 1775, Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore, offered freedom to enslaved men who escaped patriot owners and joined the British cause. Thousands sought that chance. Others fought for the patriots, hoping the language of liberty would eventually apply to them too. Some did gain freedom, but many did not. The revolution challenged slavery in theory, yet left it firmly in place in much of the new nation. Native American nations faced their own impossible choices. Many saw British rule as less threatening than American expansion. Colonists were moving westward onto indigenous lands, and independence threatened to accelerate that process. As a result, several native nations sided with Britain. When the war ended, they paid a devastating price. Their land, power, and political leverage were all weakened. Women also played a critical role in the revolution, though they were often pushed to the edges of the story. They managed homes and farms, made supplies, followed armies, worked as nurses, and carried messages. Some even acted as spies. Abigail Adams famously urged her husband to remember the ladies as new governments were being formed. But despite their contributions, women remained excluded from the political rights the Revolution celebrated. Then there was George Washington. Today, Washington is remembered as the heroic face of victory. But the untold truth is that he spent much of the war trying not to lose. When he took command of the Continental Army in 1775, he faced overwhelming problems. His men often lacked food, ammunition, uniforms, and proper training. Many soldiers signed up for short enlistments and left when their terms ended. Disease spread easily through camp. Morale rose and fell constantly. The British Army was better trained, better supplied, and backed by the world's most powerful empire. Washington knew he could not defeat Britain in a straightforward contest of strength, so he focused on endurance. If he could keep the army alive, avoid total collapse, and survive long enough, the revolution still had a chance. That strategy was tested again and again. One of Washington's boldest moments came on the night of December 25, 1776, when he crossed the icy Delaware River and launched a surprise attack on Hessian forces at Trenton the next morning. It was a small victory in military terms, but enormous in symbolic value. It revived morale at a moment when the Patriot cause seemed close to collapse. Then came Saratoga in 1777, a major turning point. The American victory convinced France that the revolutionaries had a real chance to win. In 1778, France formally allied with the United States, bringing money, troops, weapons, and naval power. Spain joined the war in 1779, and the conflict became global. The final blow came at Yorktown in 1781. American and French forces trapped British General Cornwallis while the French Navy blocked escape by sea. Cornwallis surrendered on October 19th. The fighting would continue in smaller ways, but the war was effectively decided. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, officially recognized American independence. So the untold story of the American Revolution is not just about liberty. It is about contradiction. A war for freedom fought in a society divided by class, race, loyalty, and power. A victory built not only by patriots, but by enslaved people, women, Native Americans, foreign allies, and ordinary civilians whose stories are often forgotten. The revolution created the United States, but it also began a long, unfinished debate over who freedom truly belongs to. And in many ways, that debate is still shaping America today.